share all of your thoughts, dreams, hopes, concerns, anything that was on everybody's mind when we convene the conversation, because this part of the conversation, which is structured and intended to get to an outcome, is based in a community-wide concern over where we were going next with the zoo and the park. We quickly developed and then deployed a survey. This survey went out broadly and was advertised widely in both English and Spanish, and had both English and Spanish opportunities to take the survey. And ultimately, we had over 14,000 responses to that survey, which is really amazing for any survey. It's the largest we've ever conducted as a city. It's also done in about 10 plus days. So it's pretty amazing. And tonight you'll hear from Johanna Hernandez with the city of Tucson, who will take you through those results. On the 10th of April, we had facilitated community conversations where about 13 different dialogue circles were created with a total about 135 people engaged in really thoughtful conversation, focused mostly on what are the core values or what are the main considerations that mayor and council should think about when they make a decision on the Reid Park Zoo and Reid Park. We will share that outcome as part of the final report. And then our core stakeholder group, this group that's convened here, met for that 30 hours of conversation, giving up Saturdays and nights, in really exploring all aspects of this decision that's before mayor and council. And tonight is actually the conclusion of that process. And at the end, I'll have some more comments to share on what I've observed, what I've learned from the process, and what I think it'll mean to mayor and council moving forward. I'll steal my own thunder by saying you've done an amazing job, and you've given very profound set of input to that mayor and council is really going to really appreciate as they make the final decision. And then we'll have all of this written up in some form or fashion. So when you look at what does a final report look like, ultimately there will be a mayor and council communication, which is a memo written by me with a bunch of attachments. Some of those attachments will be maybe a report on the overall process, some of the data or information from the survey, but in 2021, the results of a survey are not just a static report of a few pages. It's actually an interactive website where you can go in and actually dig through the data and filter it in ways that are meaningful to you. So there's a great deal of transparency to the process and the results and the data that was collected. And so it'll be, an analysis of that, but also the raw information itself. And then ultimately on the 4th of May, there will be a study session with mayor and council where they will take up this issue and render a decision. And what I'll say is that the engagement, the conversation does not stop there. Whatever direction we are given by mayor and council, we will continue this conversation, we will continue this engagement, and I'll be inviting all of the members of the core stakeholder group to remain engaged as we go down the path laid out for us by mayor and council. So with that, I just want to again give you my thanks on behalf of the people of Tucson and myself personally. It's been quite an adventure, and I really appreciate all of you and all of the efforts that you've given. With that, I would turn it back to Chris.
Thank you. And before we go to Johanna, who's going to talk more about the online survey results, there is an updated link that I think, Sierra, you just sent this out to folks. Is that correct? For the YouTube?
That is correct. I'm working on sending it to the large email list, but yes, it's live on our city's YouTube, and it is live on the website for this project.
I just wanted, if any of you wanted to take a second and email that out to any that you knew wanted to watch, I wanted to give you an opportunity to do that.
Chris, I can confirm
Sierra's
that are seeing us.
Sorry, Tim?
I can confirm that people are seeing us on YouTube, so we're up and running.
Now just to get the viewers to the right spot. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead. Johanna, if you would talk to us more about the outcomes of the community engagement tools.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me back to talk about the survey outcomes. I want to remind everyone that I spent a large amount of time with the group going over the results in detail.
So some people are saying that, oh, sorry,
That's okay, Sierra, go ahead.
I was trying to talk to Lane. I apologize.
Oh, okay. I just want to go tonight. I'm going to go over it in a much higher level because we don't have as much time. And really what I want to be able to do is provide context for those people that are watching that haven't seen any of the results yet so that they can understand a little bit about what the core stakeholder group had to consider when they were making their deliberating and making their choices.
And there will be about 10 minutes for questions, and the questions will come in by chat.
Yes. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, let me minimize all of the cameras so they're not in my way. Okay, so this is the main page of the survey results. So there's an executive summary for each section, and I'll go over those 3 executive summaries, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. Okay, in terms of the overall survey, it was open for 13 days, and as Tim had mentioned, received more survey responses than any city survey to date. We offered it in English and Spanish. It was advertised to the community in multiple ways, including the city website, news releases, Newsnet, survey platform for registered users, social media, intercept surveys, postcard, and flyer. We reviewed the demographics of the community and the survey respondents, and those responses reflect that this is a robust and statistically valid survey with very few outliers, and we'll cover those today in the review. Respondent demographics were compared to City of Tucson demographics, and we used summary data from the 2018 American Community Survey for Tucson. This report will all be public, so you can see that report is linked out. If you want to see more about that report, you can click on that link and see the underlying data as well. Again, that survey was conducted by the US Census Bureau. So by the numbers, right, we had 18,765 total engagements, and that's people that went to the survey, right, clicked on the button, opened the page. 14,014 total responses. We calculate public comment at 700 hours. That's at 3 minutes per response, and that's pretty conservative for a survey like this. That's 75% completion rate. So that really is an amazing turnout for a survey of this nature in such a short time frame, but really so important to the community, right? The way that surveys like this work is we compare the number of responses to the overall population of the community responding, and we determine based off of those numbers how likely it is that if we repeated the survey, we'd get the same results. And we report that in a confidence level. So this survey has a 99% confidence level and a 2% margin of error. So we can be 99% certain if we completed this survey again, the results would be the same within 2%. And we'll see when we're looking at results that 2% wouldn't change the outcomes. So we can be 99% certain we'd get the exact same outcomes if we ran the survey again. So we're going to talk a little bit about net favorability across demographics. The Mayor Regina Romero focused on engaging the community to find a solution that's win-win. With that in mind, we're not looking for just the most positive responses. We're looking for a net favorable, right? Something that is the closest to a win-win, the closest to neutral in our community. With that focus, concept D is the most neutral option across the majority of all the demographics that we evaluate. And we specifically analyzed 13 different demographics as well as the overall demographics. In terms of language access, we provided the survey in English and Spanish. As we said, we did get 52 responses to the Spanish survey, and 22 people that responded to the English survey identified a primary language other than English. 16 of those is Spanish, 6 is other, but those opted to complete the survey in English. We do have some information that you'll be able to see in the report about the Spanish-speaking population in Tucson, and whether or not that this survey was accessible to that demographic. And we believe, based off of that data, we can conclude that the survey accessibility wasn't a barrier to the Spanish-speaking demographic in this community. Because they are a large demographic, it's important that we understand accessibility for them. Okay. 2 of the next pages we'll go over are survey demographics and the report of favorability. In terms of survey demographics, right, to ensure equity in our processes and in representation of the Tucson community, we collected a bunch of demographics from respondents for the survey. Those demographics were compared to the city of Tucson population, specifically in the areas of age, race and ethnicity, and gender identity. If any demographic was found to be disproportionate to the community, and by that we mean if females make up 50% of the community, but 70% of respondents, then we analyzed that demographic for possible impact in the results, and we provided reports based on that analysis. Okay, so of those 3, we did age. Demographics were collected across 10 categories, and they were generally representative of the community. 4 of those were disproportionate to the community, 2 of which were overrepresented in the responses, and 2 of which were underrepresented in the responses. And when we go over survey demographics, you'll be able to see the details on that. In terms of race and ethnicity, we collected demographics across 8 categories. They were also generally representative of the community. 3 of those responses, those categories, were disproportionate to the community, 1 overrepresented and 2 underrepresented, and we'll go into details on the demographics page for that. And in terms of gender identity, we collected across 8 categories. In order to compare this to the community data, we had to aggregate those into 3 categories because they only collected in 3 categories in the community data. These results were disproportionate to the community in terms of overrepresentation of one and underrepresentation of the other. We'll cover that as well. When you're looking at this report yourself, this is a link to the demographics page. You click on it, it'll dig into all of the details about demographics. We'll go over those high level in just a minute. And then the favorability report. The survey asked respondents to indicate their position on 8 concepts on a 5-point scale of favorability, from 1 being strongly opposed to 5 being strongly favor, and an option in the middle of undecided. We present these responses in the form of net favorability. The net score, this is important, we're going to go over it more in favorability, but this part's important. The net score is calculated by subtracting the total number of favor responses, both somewhat favor and strongly favor, from the total number of opposed responses, both somewhat opposed and strongly opposed. The closer to 0 a concept's net score is, the more neutral that concept is in the community. This is a very standard way to calculate favorability, right? We do it all the time in, for example, politics, right? Favorability of a candidate. It's all calculated in the same way by net favorability. We present across 3 categories: all responses, subgroups of special interest, and validation groups based on demographics disproportionate to the community. Aggregated responses are all of the responses for the survey together. In terms of special interest, we did inside the city. This was a voter ballot initiative, and so we did separate out city responses, and we report on their favorability specifically. Radius around the park is reported on separately. Those responses that were from outside the city limits are reported separately. And then we also have a report out by ward, and these are done by zip code. Really important to note here that because they're done by zip code and those zip codes overlap in wards, these responses won't add up to 100% of the responses. Okay. Validation demographics, we report specifically on Hispanic or Latino by demographic selection, and 15 to 24-year-olds. We found that both of those demographics were underrepresented in the data, so we reported separately on those. Okay. And then we will go over the favorability report, just the executive summary here. Okay, so this report will summarize the full survey results across all 13 demographics that we analyzed, again, based on net favorability, looking for the most neutral outcome, and as compared to those demographic segments and aggregated data, okay? A reminder, neutrality was selected as the focal point to find a win-win solution here. So we'll dig in a little bit more to net favorability and neutrality because it's super important. This report reflects that the top 3 concepts that are closest to neutral after subtracting the opposed responses from the favor responses. It might seem counterintuitive because we normally look for either the most favorable outcome or the least opposed outcome. Here we're looking for both by focusing on concepts with relatively equal favor and opposition and therefore neutral to the community. And there's an example here of how that is calculated. Okay, so in this chart, if you can see the chart, you'll see dogs got the most favor responses, but they also got the most opposed responses. And we don't want to ignore that. If we were just going by favor, then dogs would be the leader, right? But because they also got the most opposed responses, and we don't want to ignore those opposed responses. Cats got the next highest number of favor responses, but they also got the least opposed responses. And birds got the least favor responses, a high number of opposed responses, right? If we were looking for the most favorable, the outcome would be dogs, cats, birds. If we were looking for the most opposed, the outcome would be dogs, birds, cats. But to find the most neutral, which is where we are, the outcome would be cats, dogs, birds. So keep that in mind when you're looking through these results yourself, because that is the context in which we present everything, okay? So based on this focus, you'll see in the report, there's a bunch of charts that will dig into all of the responses. The charts below will reflect concept D as the most net neutral concept, followed by concepts C and B. Concept D is the most neutral in all but 3 of the 13 analyzed demographics and shows up in the top 3 in all but 1 of them. Concept C is the next most neutral option, showing up as a top 3 neutral concept in 9 out of 13 of the demographics. And concept B rounds out those neutral options, showing up as a top 3 neutral concept in 7 out of 13. And during that survey, we provided the community with a lot of information on those concepts, what they meant, what their possible impacts were. You can find full descriptions here when you're looking at the report. And here on the report, you'll see a summary of each of the concepts. So you can dig into those a little bit more when you're looking at the report as well. This is a summary report of all of the data. It's analyzed. You want to find the full results, you'll click here and you can dig into all of the raw data yourself at that link. Okay, so just a quick preview, right? As you scroll down, you'll see all of the charts. And with each chart, there's an explanation of what you're seeing in that chart. And on each label, you'll see the top 3 neutral concepts for that chart in order of neutrality. And that'll be true all the way across the board in all of the different charts. Okay, and we'll cover quickly then the demographics. As soon as that expands, there we go. So we conducted this survey by random sampling. That means we didn't predetermine how many of each demographic should be responding. Rather, everyone had equal opportunity to respond to the survey. That generally means random samples are normally used in order to create an unbiased representation of the population, but we can create a bias just by having an overrepresentation of a demographic or an underrepresentation of a demographic. And then we have to decide if those aren't representative of the community, what is the possible impact there? Okay, the larger the sample size, the more likely the outcomes are reflective of the entire population, despite any type of misrepresentation of the demographics analyzed. Okay, so this had a really high response rate. So that means we have a lot of confidence it's representative of the community, but we still provide an analysis of every demographic that doesn't match our community. Okay. So we also collected demographics on education level, household income, employment status, and home ownership. They were not compared to the community data because that data is from 2018. It's not current enough to add value to the analysis in these areas. So we will show you, this will show the percent of demographics responses by demographic, right? So 100% is the aggregated, 87% are those people inside the city, 26% is those around the park. So you can see a key here that will tell you about the different demographics. And then this aggregated data is what we're basing the general responses on, right? So compared to the community, the aggregated data generally reflects the community in terms of proportion. We identified significant variation in each of the demographics just a little bit. So gender, we had far more females respond to the survey than are in the community. But when we looked at that data separated, it didn't add any impact. There was no significant difference between responses in males and females. So there was no impact in outcome there. In terms of age, we found some segments that were underrepresented, 15 to 24-year-olds, and some that were overrepresented, 35 to 44 and 65 to 74-year-olds. We found that 15 to 24-year-olds responded differently than the aggregated population. So we provided those responses separately to ensure that their responses weren't marginalized. And the other two demographics were consistent with aggregated data, so there's no impact there. And in terms of race or ethnicity, we saw a representation disproportionate to the community and Hispanics and Latinos and Black and African Americans. We compared their responses independently of the aggregate. The Hispanic or Latinos do not vary significantly from the aggregated data. That implies that it's not impacting the outcome, but it is a big difference. And so we provided their responses independently of the aggregated data just to ensure that they're being represented. And the responses from the Black or African American demographic didn't vary significantly. So we feel that they have no impact on the outcomes. Okay. That is a very high level summary, and all of this will be public for you guys to see. And I am happy at this point to take questions if there are any.
Please put any questions that you have in the chat.
Okay. Am I going to read the chat and answer the questions?
I'll read them out to you.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to see if we get duplicates or more questions that we can answer. So this is a question about the confidence level. The polling for the last presidential race was once again inaccurate. Since then, polling firms have identified that there are populations, in that case, Trump voters, who don't take surveys and therefore skew the results. Can that also be true here, particularly with the lower Hispanic participation, and undermine the confidence level?
Thank you. That's a good question. And I'm sure that that's accurate for the presidential election. This is a much different scale, right? Because of the number of responses compared to the number of our community, we still have a very high level of confidence. But those sampling biases, that difference of response rates from specific demographics is important, it is relevant. And that's why we pulled those responses out separately and analyzed them against the aggregated data to determine if it was skewing results. In this case, we determined it wasn't, particularly in relation to Hispanic or Latino. However, there were some demographics, for example, the 15 to 24-year-olds, where their responses varied significantly from the aggregated data. And so we made sure that we provided those responses separately so that possible impact was both noted and considered in making decisions, right? When you're doing random sampling like we are, we can't ensure a perfect response rate of each demographic. The most we can do is try and get as many responses as possible, which I think we were very successful here, in order to increase confidence, and then analyze those demographics that are often marginalized to make sure that we understand possible impact.
I think Lauren is typing her question. Is there something that you would do differently, Johanna, if you repeated the survey in like a Reid Park master plan kind of a survey or something like that? What might you do differently in order to change that result?
Change the result of the representation of demographics is what I'm going to assume you mean. And we can We can do more, we can try to do more targeted marketing to those demographics. We can't sort of determine how many we're going to get and guarantee we'll go get them, but we can do targeted marketing to specific demographics. It clearly wasn't an issue, in my opinion, of accessibility to the survey, but we do need to, we could do more targeted marketing to those demographics.
Thank you. We have a question. What neighbors received mailed surveys?
That's not really a me question because I didn't do that, but I believe we did a mile radius around the park, and Tim, Sierra, someone feel free to jump in and correct me.
Actually, Johanna, you're absolutely correct that we did mail a postcard to a mile radius of the park.
Right.
And that went out on right at a few days after the kickoff of the survey.
Yep, and then I'll note for the record that radius around the park, as you'll see when you read the report yourself, if you haven't had it, that radius around the park is 27% of our inside the city responses and only 23% of the community. And so we feel very confident that that neighborhood is represented in the responses.
This is a question. Is it possible that the Hispanic population who replied to the survey are the members of that population comfortable with computers, and there may be a segment of that population that do not habitually use computers?
Yeah, I don't have any data to support either conclusion on either side of that answer. And so I'm not going to guess as to why those responses are low. I did provide data in the survey around access to computers and smartphones for that demographic in our community and across the nation. And that data suggests very strongly that accessibility to technology or comfort with technology is not a barrier.
Thank you. Question, were the 15 to 24-year-olds included in the aggregate data and pulled out separately?
Yes, because not only were they underrepresented in the data compared to our community, but their responses varied significantly from the aggregated data. So they are part of both the aggregated data and they are presented separately so that possible impact can be seen.
Question, did you analyze the responses of people who gave their address separately from those who did not?
Okay, so giving your address, so this might be two different questions, so I'm going to clarify as I answer. You give your address when you register for the system, and we did not analyze registered users separately from everybody else because in order to provide the most complete data, we analyzed by zip code, right? Instead of by registered versus unregistered. There was also in the comment portal, which was separate from the survey, although in the same platform, the opportunity to provide your address. That information has not been analyzed for the purposes of the comment portal, but all of those comments are available for the council for review and to be able to make their decisions. I will say that the comment portal had 1,871 comments, about a 60% completion rate, right? About 3,122 people went there and 1,871 people left a comment. We did see two I would say interesting changes in the demographic data. We have two outliers under zip code where a lot of people chose other zip code in the comment portal, which means generally speaking that they're not inside the city. And then we also had a large chunk of people select under 15 years old. And so both of those things are things that we would need to do a little bit more research into, but because the comment portal is qualitative, it's about giving people a voice to say whatever it is they want to say. Those things are a little less impactful than if we were trying to quantify their comments in some way.
Thank you. The question, why did you use the subjective term net favorable instead of just using the more objective net neutral?
Net favorability is a standard method in survey analysis. And so as a city, right, we are aiming for the most neutral option. The method is still net favorability, but our outcomes are net neutral. So I explained net favorability since that's the method we used, and then focused the responses on net neutrality, which is the direction of our council.
Thank you.
Yes.
Really appreciate your time, Johanna,
Of course.
and going through this very quickly for us. And this is, as you said, something that is currently, you can see the raw data on the site. And I apologize for not knowing the answer to this. When will this be posted on the city website?
Sierra is going to post it, but I think they'll be doing it, maybe tomorrow-ish.
The latest it would be posted is Tuesday, and there's a reason why it might be as late as Tuesday, because that's when mayor and council materials go out. But we've had this presentation, which has now been live streamed, I think. I'm actually hearing we are live, so it can be posted as early as tomorrow.
We have time for one other quick question that Les came in with. Hang on just a second. Lost it. For what purpose was the third-party survey service collecting email and mailing addresses?
By third-party survey service, I assume you mean Open Town Hall. And while it is a contracted service with the city, it is our portal for surveys with the community, and we've been using it for several years now. So it's not like we went out and picked a specific third party. They collect email and mailing addresses as part of their registration into the platform, and that helps people stay informed on other engagement opportunities with the city. They do not share that information with the city. They only aggregate it for reports for us. So we couldn't get that information if we wanted to out of the platform, but it is very helpful for us to be able to do things like map responses by ward, but we can only do that for people who've registered, and re-engage people who are interested in ongoing topics with the city.
Thank you. And the last question, will there be a tutorial on how to filter the data?
Do you mean like today?
Not today. I know there won't be one today, but if people needed to, does the site itself perhaps have some sort of instructions? Open.
It's pretty user friendly, but I'm more than happy to make myself available to help if people have any types of issues, filtering the live responses. Open Town Hall itself has help and guidance for the community, right? Website help if they're struggling to filter the data, but I'm also more than happy to help.
Thank you. Thanks for your time, Joanna. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to move on now to another report out of something that's continued already, which is the dialogue circles. And Marley, I believe you're going to take us through that. And you're on mute or unheardable.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I'm Marley. I'm also with the Center for Community Dialogue and Training, working alongside Chris and Joanna. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the dialogue circles and the community conversation that we all had. And that was on Saturday, April 10th. And so first, I just want to start by saying, so this was an invitation only dialogue, set of dialogues. And we have, I believe, posted at this point on the website a list of organizations that were invited to the conversation, and the invitations were sent out to. The conversations were held via Zoom online. And there was technical assistance offered and provided for those who indicated that they needed it. So the event ran from 1 to 4 p.m. And it began with a presentation of the different concepts by Tim. And that was about a 30-minute period, just going over the information associated with those concepts. And then the dialogue circles themselves ran from about 1:55 to 3:55, which was about 2 hours of conversation. And so just to tell you a little bit more about what the dialogue circles look like. So in these dialogue circles, you use a talking piece. And so the participants speak like one by one in a safe and respectful format. And it encourages, thoughtful exploration of people's experiences and around their values on both the Reid Park and Reid Park Zoo. We also had folks in the lead up to the conversation. We go through a series of kind of intentions for the conversation and then also agreements for the conversation. So things like, we agree to treat each other with respect and not interrupt, turn cell phone off, things like that. And we had everyone agree to those guidelines and agreements. In the dialogue circles, there were opening and closing rounds, and then 9 rounds of questions where you go around the circle and each person has a chance to say their piece about that question. As Tim said, there were 13 circles held, and in total we had 25 facilitators helping to facilitate those circles. And in each circle, there were about 6 to 9 individuals in conversation. And all members, I believe, of the CSG, the core stakeholder group here, participated in those conversations as well. So let's see. The process, just I'm going to give a high level overview again. We asked people questions around some memories with the park and zoo, their connections, had people speaking about their hopes and fears around, the park and zoo and what's going on, their values. There was discussion of the concepts on the table. And then there was also a process around a moderate consensus task that was asked of all the participants to come up with consensus recommendations. And not all groups came to a consensus in their groups, but all groups did have the same questions and the dialogue and things like that. So with that, because this was, dialogue circles and these were all qualitative kind of conversations, I am going to put it out for you all that on the website, we've also posted the results, and the kind of the report out from the groups and the conversations. So if you all would like to take a look at that, I believe there is going to be a link posted into the chat as to where you can find all of the information that came out of the dialogue circles. And I'm just doing kind of a high level overview. So that is my piece. And I don't know if we have time for questions, Chris, but happy to answer.
We do have a moment for questions if there are any. Lauren, I'm guessing that's a residual hand, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is. You're right.
All right, well then let's go ahead and move forward. Thank you, Marley. I appreciate that overview. Now what I want to do is get into the CSG report out. So first I want to just share this as an orienting document. Okay, this is a listing of all of the times that the CSG met. And if I'd shown it to all of y'all before you'd signed up for this group, I'm not sure you would have wanted to be on here because it was a lot of work. We met the 27th of March, the 7th, 10th, 13th, 16th twice, 17th, 19th, and 21st of April, including this meeting. Just in meeting time alone, there's 29 hours. And I know that there were emails and people studying things and conversations and research that happened outside of that. So very excellent amount of effort put in a very short amount of time. The process that you used in deciding what you were going to recommend to mayor and council consisted of, the way it looked was sometimes you would talk as a large group, sometimes you'd talk as a small group, sometimes you'd take a poll and then work from the results of that poll to see what could be evaluated. Sometimes you'd make proposals to each other. So there were a variety of ways in which you tried to parse the task that was ahead of you. The very first thing that you put yourself to accomplish and that you did accomplish was to reach consensus on the question that you were going to, here we go, the consensus question. So this is the question that you all agree needs to be addressed in making a recommendation to mayor and council. It's the parameters of your conversation, but it's also a prioritization of those things that you think are most important to consider in this outcome. So in ensuring the primary question you had was, I need to move something out of my way here. What solutions for Reid Park protect Tucson's need for free, accessible open space and enhance a quality zoo for the region? That's the root of your question right there. Then you looked at specific areas in which the answer to that question would be found. Ensuring equitable and inclusive access for park users and city residents. Mitigating climate change through reducing hardscape, protecting and nurturing old growth trees and canopy, creating and maintaining waterscapes, etc. Balancing fiscal responsibility and taxpayer impact with community value. Supporting zoo conservation, education, and entertainment. Providing for open and transparent input from all stakeholders in future planning for the park and entities within. Preserving public trust in leadership and bonding. And protecting surrounding neighborhoods from negative impacts from the operation of the zoo. So this was a big lift to be able to come up with a common vision in creating this question and reaching consensus that this was the question that was going to guide your deliberations. You all collectively turned in the same direction and looked at the problem from the same direction. And after you looked at the problem from the same direction and talked about it and had some very spirited conversations and some really hard conversations, this was the consensus statement that you are recommending to mayor and council. And so I will read this. We worked hard and in good faith. We reached consensus on this question and used it to guide our deliberations. And then this is the consensus question that I just read to you. We are forwarding a poll taken by the core stakeholder group on April 17, in which members indicated their level of support for each concept, each of the 8 concepts from the city. Based on the poll results, we looked at 3 concepts that had the least amount of opposition, which was concepts A, D, and G, and focused discussion on concepts D and G. We discussed the pros and cons of D and G and the level to which they met the criteria in the consensus question. We forward those deliberations in hopes they may be of use to mayor and council. We could not reach consensus on a concept that we all agreed met the criteria in the consensus question. So I have a Word document, let me stop the share here, that goes through the pros and cons of D and G as they were identified by the group.
Chris, can you, just for the people watching, briefly describe what A, D, and G are? We're used to the terms, but I'm not sure everybody is.
Sure. So concept A is no expansion, no zoo expansion at all. Concept D is that the zoo expands into the northwest area of Reid Park, north of the North Pond. And concept G is that the zoo expands into the parking lot area and the therapeutic rec center area in front of to the north of the zoo. All right, so let me share this guy. Okay, so we divided into two groups, and the groups were in discussing D and G, there was a lot of conversation about this is why I like D and this is why I like G. And then there was opposition to D and G by members of the group. So we divided into two groups for those who didn't like concept D to talk about what would make concept D better for them, what could make it acceptable to them. What were the pros and cons of D, basically, and what kind of a proposal could you make about if concept D had these elements, we could provide support for it. And then people who were opposed to concept G, which is expanding to the north of the zoo into the parking lot and hardscape area, had the same conversation. What could happen to concept G that would make it more acceptable to us as an outcome? So even though the groups were not able to reach consensus, they did agree that the conversations in their small groups, upon which each small group reached consensus, would be valuable to share with mayor and council because it outlines where there's points of agreement and where there are not. So in this first one, the CSG members who were opposed to concept D made this report. Their opposition to concept D is because, one, it meets only one of the values of the consensus question. It takes existing green open space. It removes mature trees that should remain. The major change in the park without sufficient time for a Reid Park master plan that has input from neighboring areas. It interferes with free access to the retention pond and playground. They support concept G because it meets all of the values on the consensus question. It's on hardscape, not green open space. It keeps existing park intact. It preserves old growth trees, allows the zoo to expand, can be less expensive by doing something such as leasing the Therapeutic Rec Center through the Tucson Unified School District and eliminating a parking garage. It meets the values expressed in the community conversation referencing the dialogue circles, and at least impacts the flow through Reid Park, parking, people, and environment. The report from the CSG members who were opposed to concept C is the following. The group would not accept concept G alone as a proposal to mayor and council. This group is opposed to concept A, which, as a reminder, is the no expansion for the zoo. What could make concept G something we could support? One, find secure, timely funding that is fiscally responsible. Two, expedite the process for funding, zoo redesign, and begin construction all within 2 years. Expand surface parking into existing hardscape. So, for example, move the maintenance yard to a secure location. Funding for a new dedicated parks maintenance yard that properly accommodates functional needs. Solution for how to handle bus drop-offs to the zoo and revise front entry of zoo using taxpayer dollars effectively. Capital costs must be reduced, could be through considerations such as leasing space that would not reduce or limit therapeutic rec activity and future expansion potential, or examining whether or not the communication towers are actually required. Number 7, Reid Park Master Plan would be completed within 12 months with robust public participation and no net loss of open, free, accessible green space. I just want to point out number 7 was also represented in this one. Major change to the park without sufficient time for a Reid Park master plan, and mentioned in this one as well, with the master plan completed within 12 months with robust public participation. This group also said, we have strong reservations about concept G as listed below. Impediments, opposed in the public survey by 2-to-1. Complexity of making it all work, not cost effective, referencing a cost of a parking garage. Time consuming, funding may not come through. The communication towers is a problem that needs to be resolved. And how do you work the entry to the zoo? $1.5 million put into a new entry, perhaps for naught. This group favored concept D for the following reasons. It allows ways to minimize the green space taken and maximize the hardscape taken. No net loss of open, free, accessible green space. It is the least expensive of the alternative locations that is not B or C. And B or C are the original concepts, the original design for the zoo expansion into the area to the west, which is now Barnum Hill and the Duck Pond, was B. And C was that area plus a nature area, a natural resources area up in the northwest part. Concept D leaves Barnum Hill and the Duck Pond intact. It honors the results of the survey and is the quickest path to design and construction. This group supports all of the benefits listed on option D in the survey. We think it would be an interesting idea to include the existing maintenance yard for green space, but there is a cost associated with that, and that should be considered. Those are the outcomes, the group's outcomes for things that they were able in this very short time together to reach, upon which they could reach consensus. Very concrete information and feedback to mayor and council, despite the fact that you aren't saying, here's the one option that incorporates all of these. But that conversation can continue. What I'd like to do now is give each of you a chance to have a voice as we end up this process about your thoughts about participating in this process. Many of you have said that this is a different kind of process than you've ever experienced before. And so I just ask you to share brief thoughts about your experience of this process. I've got about 20 minutes for this time, so if that will help you gauge the length of your response. And with your permission, I will call on folks just to make it a little easier and let you know who's going to be coming up next. I'll just call on you in the order that you appear on my screen. So we'll start with Sylvia. And I'm sorry, and Sylvia, after Sylvia will be Les. Sylvia, you're on mute if you're talking. Okay, we're gonna, she might be having some trouble, or perhaps she had to step away for a moment. So
Yes, her audio is not working.
Oh, her audio is not working. Oh, okay. Did you learn that from the chat?
Correct.
Okay.
She's switching to her laptop, so perhaps come back to her at the end.
We'll come back to her. Perfect. Good to hear. Okay, so we'll go to Les, and after that, we'll go to Margot.
Hi, this is definitely an educational process. I learned a lot more about what considerations go into zoo operations and expansions, and about how green space is valued and used. I know how I value and use it, so it was interesting to hear other people's perspectives as well. It was encouraging that, as you have said, while we did not agree on a concept, we agreed on what should guide that decision, which gives me cause for cautious optimism. Thank you for putting all this together in such short time. My hat goes off to everyone who ran this show. Thank you.
Thank you, Les. Margot, and then Jocelyn.
Oops. I enjoyed the process very much, getting to meet new people and to hear their concerns and their desires for the community and the things that are going on around them. I learned very much how important green space and water is valued in a desert city, the ability to go and sit quietly under some trees in a larger context. And I really enjoyed being part of this, and I want to thank all the people who worked so hard to put it together.
Thanks, Margot. Jocelyn and then Pam.
So I really liked the process because it generated a lot of different ideas. It got people sort of thinking creatively. It was time limited, which I think was a constraint, to the process of coming to a consensus on an option, and maybe not any of the options that were listed, but another alternative option that met everyone's desires. So I really appreciated being a part of it.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Pam and then Mike A.
I learned a lot about a lot of information from this process, and I thought it was, a very important process for information to, be delivered to our community. So, everyone knows what's going on. So yeah, I appreciated it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Mike A. and then Neil.
Well, first, I just want to say that, wow, the largest survey that Tucson has ever done. That's fantastic. I'm very impressed. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to come together and sit down and try to work out a solution that works for everyone here. I really appreciate the mayor and council for taking this pause so we can have this conversation. I sense that everyone came with an open mind and an open heart to work this out and find a win-win solution. I'm very pleased also the values emerged from these conversations. Thank you.
Mike, Neil, and then Mark.
I'm going to second and echo everything that's been said so far. I was very pleased with the process, and I thought it was very valuable to have an opportunity for the individual breakout chats and the small groups to really get into a little bit more detail about what is motivating people and some of what their concerns and recommendations are. And overall, I thought the process worked very well.
Thank you, Neil. Mark, and then Nancy.
I feel we were in our discussions transparent with each other. We didn't hold back our concerns. We were respectful. We agreed and we disagreed, but ultimately we listened to understand each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy, and then Lauren.
I was very impressed with the process, the professionalism of the Center for Community Dialogue, with how quickly the city was able to get us detailed information to help the conversations, but especially the number of hours and genuine openness of everyone in this group. The one-on-one breakouts were also very helpful to get more in-depth understanding of where each other's point of views come from. And I think that's what helped us achieve all the commonalities that we did, the creative solutions and open dialogue. So those were the things that I really enjoyed about this process.
Thank you, Nancy. Lauren, and then Star.
I really appreciate everyone who put this process together. It had a lot of moving parts, and I don't wear hats usually, but my hat goes off to you for pulling it off. I'd also appreciate my fellow core stakeholder group members for their collegiality, focus, intelligence, and willing to, reach across to each other. I think we did a lot of good work that can serve as a basis for a good Reid Park master plan. I feel that this was like a first step towards that, as well as being the solution for the solution of this particular issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. Star, and then Lara.
I'd just like to comment that I really enjoyed this group. They were intelligent, they were committed, they were articulate, and every day I was amazed at their ability to look at an issue from different perspectives. I found it also interesting that we all learned a lot about the park, having lived near the park for 35 years, I was amazed how little I actually knew about the park. And I appreciate now knowing a lot more, or I think I do anyway. And I'd like to thank the city council for having this pause, because I think it really opened up a dialogue. And no matter what the outcome, I think this was a very productive thing and should continue. Not necessarily this group, but other groups of people that represent their constituents. It's really, it was a very beneficial group. And I thank, and you led it, Chris. And Chris was an excellent leader. Excellent. Thank you.
Star. Lara, and then Meredith.
Great. Well, for me, being new to Tucson and new to this position, it was definitely a 45-day introduction to a lot of educational things for me in terms of perspective and passion for parks. And I certainly appreciate that, because regardless of the fact that if we could not come to one final conclusion, what we did have was a lot of input and a lot of dedication to parks. And so certainly at a core, I can always appreciate that. But I also found that the process that was led by you, Chris, and Marley and Joanna, did help us to facilitate inroads where perhaps when we first started out with all of this, I didn't think was feasible. And so it did allow us to have pretty good dialogue and understanding. And I think for me, the takeaway is similar to what Lauren said. There's a lot of core values, and also Mike pointed out, there's a lot of core values and a lot of emphasis on priorities that we definitely can utilize when we do get to a master plan. And I do appreciate that. And I collected a lot of that information to make sure that we share it and keep it going.
Thank you, Lara. Meredith, and then Michael.
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what I just heard from Star and from Lara both. I think what was tried was, in a funny way, kind of radical. I mean, 45 days to try to come into a space to take data, take information from a big survey, take data that Tim and the city staff organized based on crazy questions we had that we wanted to learn about and learn about fast, to be able to play a role for our neighborhood associations and other groups, be articulate about what those particular groups might also have uniquely, and bring that to the table within 45 days. I mean, I would say, to the center, Chris, and your incredible work with your team to be able to build dialogue that was impactful, that let us learn together through sometimes conflicted points of view. I think the process was phenomenal. And I really hope that as a community, we have the opportunity to use this process in a more consistent way. It was relatively fast, right, compared to more standard processes. And I think it was very high quality. And so appreciation and gratitude for that, for the full team, for all that came to the table, and my partners with the CSG.
Thank you, Meredith. Michael, and then Bill.
I agree with everything that's been said. I guess I'd start with, I really do appreciate the mayor and council, and I want them to appreciate how valuable this 40 days have been, even if we didn't reach a final single option. For me, it was personally very informative. As with Star, I live next to the park, but there are parts I've never seen, and there are parts that I didn't fully appreciate. And hearing people talk about what affected them has been very important. There were a lot of creative ideas. There was a lot of dialogue. There was a chance to exchange with people of different views. And I think focusing on the values of what we want to see in that park was also really both very important and very impressive. I think finally, I would say that although we didn't have two questions, I think there are two that we would have easily reached consensus on. One is that we don't have enough park space, and the other is we don't have enough park funding. So with that, I will end.
Thank you, Michael. Bill, and then Margaret.
Yes, I want to thank everybody involved. Chris and your crew did a great job. I thank the city for providing the information when requested and allowing us to have this pause. But in total, I think you saw the community and those of us in this group demonstrate the value of Reid Park and the need for the city to improve Reid Park, what it can or could be because it is one of the main features that everybody in the city uses at one point in time. Many know in this group that I've been working on these issues for 35 years, and I think that's really demonstrated the need for park space and the value of Reid Park. So I want to thank everybody for their time.
Thank you, Bill. Margaret, and then Sylvia.
Okay, again, I would also like to thank the entire team, Chris and your staff and the city employees who've been involved have just done a mammoth job in a very short period of time with a bunch of people who had lots of different ideas. So thank you for pulling it together. It was very well organized. It supported and encouraged open dialogue, which was greatly appreciated. It was very respectful and inclusive, and the dialogue circles demonstrated really wide representation across the city that I appreciated a great deal. So thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what everybody said, obviously. Thank you to the facilitators. It's really hard to facilitate, a meeting like this and discussions like this. I also want to thank the grassroots members of the Save the Heart of Reid Park as well for making this possible, but also the city and the mayor for making this for hearing us out and making this possible. And it was really hard. It was really hard for me personally being in these meetings. And I don't know if it's because, I don't know, I have a full-time job, I'm a caretaker. And like Chris said, I think if she would have told us how long these meetings were going to be, I might not have probably attended or been the leader for this. But what got me going, though, and what made me attend these meetings is contrary what has been said, is that there is a lack of representation, especially people who look like me and the backgrounds that come from me. And so I thought about my mom, I thought about my aunts and uncles who are not tech savvy, who couldn't have their voices be heard. So I did it for them. But thank you all.
Thank you, Sylvia. And thank you everyone for your comments. At this point, we're going to go to Tim to talk about what happens next.
Good evening, everyone, again, and thank you, Chris. And so I'll talk about next steps in a moment, but I have a couple reflections of my own from just listening to what you all just shared. And one of them will be that I'm going to play that video of that last 15 or 20 minutes for every council member, whether they like it or not. And they'll like it because I think it really speaks to mayor and council made a bold choice and a leap of faith when they called for a pause, because they had every legal and previous decision-making reason to move forward in the manner that is reflected by some of the concepts. But they were hearing their community, craving a dialogue and sharing values that needed to be heard. And so they took a bold move and they called a 45-day pause for this conversation. And you rewarded their faith in you in ways that, on reflection, you will hopefully see it with the tremendous amount of value with which I see it. Because what you shared tonight, all of the work that you put in, and being willing to, even though you're feeling like, well, we didn't get to a final one. What you got to was a question that's impactful with 8 key factors associated with it. And you also were willing to share your deep thoughts, both in favor and against D and G. And they're going to see all that and they're going to understand all that. And I believe that your faith in the city will be rewarded when you see how we move forward from here. Because I think you will find us going down a path that honors your input significantly. So, having said those reflections, our next step is to take all of this and present it to the council. It'll be done in a couple stages. One is we have to talk to them all individually. So, because you went through it yourself, members of the core stakeholder group have gone through that survey with Johanna now twice. And there's just so much to unpack there and to understand. So we need to take that time with them. They haven't yet seen the results of the dialogue circles. They haven't yet heard, except for those that may be watching tonight, they have not yet heard the outcomes of this core stakeholder group. And they're going to be thrilled. They're going to be impressed. They're going to be emotional about how much you put into this and what you shared. And they're going to take all that, and then we'll prepare the documents that they need, to be able to go through a discussion at council. And then they're going to render a decision on May 4th. And I have high confidence in that decision, and that our conversation is not done. Our conversation about Reid Park, I can't speak for council, but there will be a new Reid Park master plan. That much I'm certain of. And I'm certain that we will find a way to move the project and the park forward in a way that you all are proud of. And it's because of your contributions that we'll be able to do that. So again, I thank you. And from the bottom of my heart, I never shared my experiences with Reid Park, and I'm going to take the privilege of the microphone to share for a second, because I was just here to give you information. So when I first moved to Tucson, I had an apartment, a studio apartment at 5th and Country Club Apartments. I was in apartment E5 with my young children who I moved to Tucson to be with. And we spent a lot of time at Himmel Park and a lot of time at Reid Park. I was a soccer coach, youth soccer coach, a T-ball coach. And I've spent many hours in Reid Park, Himmel Park. This part of the community means a lot to me. And the outcome of this dialogue means a lot to me. So thank you from my personal standpoint and my experiences with Reid Park. With that, I turn it back to you, Chris. And
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I had one more. I'm sorry, Chris. It's about you. I do want to let the core stakeholder group know that as much as you appreciate Chris, I appreciate her too. And she was your advocate throughout, right up to the very end, even throughout today. Chris has always been your advocate, and for an advocate for an open, transparent, and complete dialogue. So thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Tim. That really means a lot to me. Thank you very much. And now I have this really more mundane question, but equally pertinent, which is, is this group now done?
It's a great question. So from the standpoint of the community conversation core stakeholder group, yes, this completes your task. This is the culmination of your work. Followed immediately by my invitation to participate with us as we go to the next conversation, which will be about something that's going to probably be designed, something that's going to probably evolve over the next few months, something that also will result in a Reid Park master plan conversation. There's no group I'd rather do that with than you. And even though now we've shown you how much time this takes, maybe we'd spread 30 hours over a few months instead of a few weeks. But you will be hearing from myself, Lara, and Sierra about what the next conversation looks like. And I promise we won't make you do it in 45 days.
Any questions for Tim? All right. Well, I feel all emotional now and very gratified to hear how important the process was to this, because I'm a real process geek. And I want to have a closing that helps us carry our thoughts down the line a little bit. When we entered this process, there was a high amount of polarization. We have not solved any of the questions that led to that polarization, but the polarization itself has been melted. It's been thawed, and people have started to work together in productive ways. They take a long time, but they do yield some outcomes. So with that in mind, and looking ahead to the reality that there's still a long way to go before these questions are answered, the question I'd like to have us answer as a final is, what are your hopes for future community interactions around this issue? And just in a little bit of a break from what we normally do, if we could all respond to that. So I invite Joan and Tim and Marley to weigh in as well, because you have been there every step of the way with this process as well. What are your hopes for future community interactions around this issue? And if I may, I'd like to go first. I had this midnight conversation with my husband where I rant and rave and pace the floor. And it was about how people are, everyone would admit that conflict, that violent conflict, and there's a lot of ways to define violence, in the long run doesn't solve something. It may solve something quickly and in the short run, but those who are oppressed come back around again. And yet we as humans are very quick to say, well, let's use whatever the violent response is, whether it's oppression or actual physical violence. And in talking, which is what you all put yourselves through for all of these many hours, we also know that the outcome is iffy. It doesn't always work. And yet when that's the piece of it that seems to stick in people's mind. Oh, they didn't come up with a solution. They didn't solve the problem in the time that we gave them. And therefore, why would we bother to try talk? You see, it doesn't work. Whereas they never apply that same criticism to violent responses that in the long run don't work. So my hope for the future is that we all become little seeds for dialogue in all of the many conflicts that we see in our lives, this one and others. Because even though it takes a longer time and is just an iffy an outcome in the long, it doesn't cause any harm and it builds bridges. So that's my hope for the future. And with that, I will pass, and I'll ask each of you to pass as well. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Marley.
All right. Well, I definitely don't have something as prophetic to follow up on that. I wasn't sure that we would have an opportunity to talk about this, but, as someone who, I am more new to this process of community conversation and dialogue and whatnot, I see the power every day, I think, in the work I do of dialogue and sitting down and storytelling and telling our experiences, and having these spaces that are created for, respectful dialogue and sharing. And so I just think that this group was an extremely powerful version of that. And especially 18 people, I think it was, on this group. I mean, that's a lot of people to try to come together in experiences and conversation. And I think it's, and yet here we are, and hearing all of you talk about the process was truly heartwarming, because I think there were a lot of doubts, on the end of process in terms of, just to be transparent, it's like, where do we go from here? So I'm rambling on, but thank you all, and I think it's really important what we did here, and I hope that this continues. So I am going to pass it along to the next person I see on my screen, which is Margaret.
Thank you. I thought about this question a lot this afternoon, and I sincerely hope that the city will facilitate robust community dialogue, not only in this, but in advance of any future plans that utilize tax dollars. I think this was an enormous experience. I think it would be even better if it was done as part of the planning process, not after the fact. I think that the engagement with the Hispanic community was underrepresented, and I think that's an omission that must be corrected. And I think open and transparent communication is essential. So those are what I hope for. And I'm not looking at a screen, but I am going to pass to Margot.
I think we've all learned about mute and unmute in this experience. I had several things, Margaret, just as you were speaking about the importance of doing this early. I would absolutely agree with you that. And actually, the city does try to do that through its commissions. And I think one of the problems with the boards and commissions that it has that do work, for instance, I serve on the Environmental Services Advisory Committee, and we do look at rate structures ahead of time. And we spent more than a year talking about the change in the glass and what was going to happen and how did it work and what were the pros and cons of it. That is going on. And the problem is that we can't get the city council members to appoint enough people to go to those commissions and be involved in those conversations. Because from my experience is that it works two ways. We bring our experiences to the city staff and to the council and broaden that. But in addition, they educate us, just like we've talked about here, and we spread that word out to the rest of the community, to our circles. So it's a win-win for the commission. So I just really want to give a plug. And if any of you aren't serving on one of the commissions, call up your council member, write a letter to the city manager, write a letter to the city clerk and say you're interested in this particular commission. And they're all listed and there's some, 40 of them. So I'm sure you would find one that would interest you. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was diversity, equity, and inclusion, this new DEI, which is the latest fad in a lot of groups that are beginning to talk about that. And it really has been very interesting in some of the boards that I serve on to see how that changes the dialogue when you start really working at DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think we all need to reach out and involve more people, a wider variety of folks. So I would hope, that these dialogues would continue. And the earlier, the better. It's just been shown over and over again in research over 40 years since the beginning of the National Environmental Policy Act, where that was the first time people had to be brought in on environmental decisions, that when they were brought in upfront and solved the questions early, it moved faster and more easily through the community than when you tried to sneak it through and you ended up in a court case. So that's just from there's long experience with this. So it's really important to do. But please join boards and commissions and help the city in a wide variety of topics of things that are going on. And Star, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. I too have learned to use the mute and unmute. One of the things I thought was really important, and what you just said about joining boards and commissions, I'm not probably going to be one anymore in my life to join boards and commissions, but representing a neighborhood, because we are the ones that were affected by all this. And that's what was so amazing that I think the city should look at more is representation from those people affected most by what you're doing. And when we talk about the issue of people who didn't do the survey, who live, let's say, south of 22nd Street, who didn't have access to computers or whatever, they are totally affected by what the zoo does. And they need representation, as does my neighborhood, as does so many people. And I think it's important to bring people in that aren't necessarily on the commissions or on the boards, maybe as extra people to give their points of view, because I think we all had really excellent points of views of how this is going to affect us and our families. And so I think it's a good thing to carry forward. And I would like to see more representation of people who are affected most by what the council does. And I think I don't say that they don't consider that, but just considering it is not enough if they don't hear what the people have to say. And I will call on Tim.
Thank you very much. So my hope and vision for the future is pretty simple. That either February or March, sometime when it's a little bit cooler than now, but even April's not too bad, when we're able to meet on Barnum Hill and look out over whatever the outcome is from the shade of the eucalyptus trees on Barnum Hill together without masks on and feel like we did something impactful now and that we're going to be proud of a year from now. And so that last time I met with many of you or some of you on Barnum Hill, was not as fun a conversation, but it was an impactful conversation. And I think it was also civil. It was also very, very good. And it contributed toward getting to the point where we could convene this type of a dialogue. So that's what I look forward to, is seeing you all on Barnum Hill. I will call on a wild card if she's there. I will call on Sierra, who's been running a lot of the stuff behind the scenes and doesn't always like to come in front. But Sierra, if you're there, I would call on you.
I would go on camera, but for some reason it's not working, so I look like grass. This process has been enlightening for me, and I appreciate the experience. I know that COVID times allowed us to find new ways to reach people that weren't always in person. So I appreciate everybody's patience with us as I worked through some of these kinks, and everybody's been so nice and patient with us. I look forward to the involvement of this group and the entire group that we've reached out to in the community staying involved in this conversation and not just letting it drop off as we move forward with a master plan for the park. So thank you, everybody, and thanks, Tim, for calling on me.
You get to call on somebody yourselves here.
Oh, Lara?
Pick the boss, got it.
That was an easy one. So going back to the original question, the hopes for community interactions around this issue, and Sierra kind of stole my thunder, because what I really wanted to say is I expect everybody that has been on this group and everybody that we have captured through emails and comment cards come out when we do have further design plan impact discussions for the master plan. And also too, that you will also be supportive at park issues at large. Sierra's right. We have learned a lot. We've learned how to pivot and be very robust and creative and put things together on the fly. And that just makes us stronger. But I hope that your participation here will make you want to come out when you see an invitation, come out and participate in the future as well. Tim put it best at the very beginning, the engagement continues, but that's on both ends. That's not just a one-sided engagement. So I will pass this now to Mark.
Wow. Well, I continue to learn from all of you, including the present words. My hope is that a balance is achieved between the competing interests, and that the mayor and council continue to work towards a common solution. And I will pass to Michael.
I'm getting the unmute. I'll get there. I did something and everybody disappeared. There we go. Okay, you're all back again. The funny things with Zoom. I know from my time with the city how much time and effort they put into providing notice, how dedicated the people there are. And I really do appreciate that. And I appreciate the frustration that's often felt when, despite all the attempts at providing notice, it turns out there are a lot of people who didn't get notice. From my vantage point as retired from the city, I really appreciate I don't have to pay attention to what goes on in the city. I no longer make my full day about learning every little detail that's going on in the city. I'm quite happy not knowing. So it was a surprise to find out about the plans for the zoo going into Barnum Hill. But I think I'll also go back to when I first started out practicing law. I went to work for the Legal Services Corporation, providing legal services to migrant farm workers. Legal services at that time recognized you can't have just regular offices providing legal services to migrant farm workers. You have to have separate offices, and then you have to have outreach people that actually go out to the farms, the fields, and labor camps and find them where they are, because otherwise they will never get services. I've worked with other community and labor organizations. I know the problems of organizing people and getting them interested. And I know that's why a lot of the city efforts don't always succeed. I think there's much more of a need for an active getting out into the community, in this case, particularly the areas south of 22nd, letting them know in advance, not just through notices and the normal procedures, but people going out and talking to them. And I think that can make a big difference. I think this process has awakened a lot of people, and I think has set a good base for the Reid Park Master Plan to be looked at. And my real hope is that this conversation will continue, and that we'll really all participate in how we can have a much better Reid Park. My final thought sort of goes back to what Tim said. After all these hours, I was wondering what on earth I was doing here. On Sunday morning, I walked with my dog down to Barnum Hill in the duck pond. I saw 2 little kids chasing the ducks, another one trying to feed the ducks, which I know they're not supposed to do. And then about 5 little kids running along the bank, squealing at the sight of turtles rising from the murky depths. This is because they can keep doing that, and I can keep walking by and enjoying seeing them doing that. So I'm thankful for that, and I hope we have a better park. I will pass to Lauren.
Thanks. As from having become aware of the plans for Barnum Hill, Barnum Hill was just something I took for granted that I thought would always be there, and I do hope that it will be there for generations to come. As part of this, I've had to really do so much studying about our city and how it works. And I found that there are so many great components, like Plan Tucson, that has all kinds of stuff about mitigating climate and promoting healthy parks and getting more park space. There's so many great components to that plan. And there's also, I've heard there's a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee or a commission. And there's also a parks commission. There's also a way to get information, through public records requests. And my hope for the future is that all these things will be revivified and really, really work together in a more vibrant way. And so we can really walk our talk, so that all those great policies, like for example, Tim gave a great talk about the services that trees provide. It's even quantifiable in terms of dollars. I just really hope that all of these policies are going to be implemented, not only in the decision for Reid Park, but for our city as a whole. Thank you. And I will pick Sylvia. Did you already go?
No, I didn't go. I wanted to echo like Margot's and Margaret, obviously being more inclusive, right? More Black and Brown Indigenous folks to be involved in this communication and interactions. And it's a little harder during COVID. I am aware of that. So the strategies used for communities like mine is more engageful, more personal interaction, and a little bit more having to build that trust between the city and my community. So I do hope that the city is open to feedback about how to be more engageful, even compensation as well, like compensating community members for their time. I know it could be a little radical, but sometimes, it is needed, especially for if we want to have the youth involved as well. I think that's another thing that it was lacking here, is more youth involvement. And yeah.
Who would you like to pass to, Sylvia?
Mike, I don't think Mike went.
Thanks. No, I haven't. Well, there's no question that this community values a quality zoo, but two other values that emerged from our conversations that are very important are open park space and old growth trees. And it's my hope that these values continue to guide any future decisions regarding Reid Park or the entire city. And I want to thank Tim also for predicting that Barnum Hill will survive so that we can climb up there and look out over the entire park. Thank you. I'll pass to Jocelyn.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, I think it's been good to hear folks talking about inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, my understanding is really, one of the things that I think our community should focus on is really elevating the voices of communities and people that have historically been muted, either intentionally or unintentionally, be it through the design of a survey or, just not asking the question. And so I think that's a really important part of future communication, that those voices get elevated. I think it would be nice going forward that we could continue to discuss the options that are on the table that our group discussed, and continue to provide different ideas and creative solutions for things, whatever council decides. And just a reminder, and I thank Tim and I thank Michael for sharing their kind of memories of being in Reid Park, because I think that's an important piece of all of this. To some people looking at a map, the park is just land, or some people see dollar signs, or some people, they look at the map in a different way. But for those people who actually utilize the park, it gets looked at in terms of memories. Oh, that's where I learned to ride my bike. That's where I that's where I taught my kid how to hit their first ball. And those things are very valuable in our community. And I will go to Meredith.
Thanks. There have been so many wonderful comments, and it gets to this point where you think those are all pieces of what I would like to share. But I think there's a piece for me about the importance of value-based dialogues. And in particular, one of the things that I found interesting in this process that ultimately did begin to move, which I think was really important, is the notion of, the city, or a particular organization, or sort of creating entities that are not about the people or the values of the entity, but they're about me versus them. And I think having a ability to have a value-based dialogue together that was facilitated with the participation of the range of stakeholders in a really high quality process, to me there's something very important to commit to together for these processes. It took some time to get there, but I also feel like that ability to collaborate in that space and sort of gently collaborate, right, was really, really important. And I find myself reflecting regularly with community work how often the face of the city becomes sort of objectified or generic when the city is really us, right? We participate with the city, right? And so that notion of ongoing participation is what makes the city part of us. Not participating with the city is what makes the city, capital T, capital C, the city. So I hope we can continue to hold on to that notion of collaboration together is how we ultimately get to solutions that we can both and all live with. And so that's what I hope we can carry forward. Now I'm gonna have to, I think, Bill, you have not yet spoken.
Thank you. No, everybody's said such great things, but I have to go back to what Margot said. You really need to participate in the functions and organizations, commissions, committees that the city puts forth. And you just sometimes have to keep knocking at the door to hear your voice or have your voice heard. And what I found great about this organization or group was that I have fought for Reid Park for many years, and now the city realizes the value of it and how many voices out there are concerned about it. So I appreciate this large group demonstrating the value of open space, especially Reid Park. And I also value people who volunteer their time on special issues. I've been very involved in the Barrio Neighborhood Coalition. And what we are trying to address is displacement and gentrification of minorities. And it is an issue. COVID has really brought forth the value of having in place affordable housing, rental conditions, being able to have legal representation for those that are being evicted from their homes. So these are big issues that our city will face now and for a few years due to COVID. But I want to thank the city for at least giving us the opportunity to take this time to learn the value of this process and allowing people to have their input. And I want to thank all of you for voicing all your statements. I invite you to look at when Plan Tucson comes up again and to really participate. It's a valuable tool and it needs to be used at all times. And I'm going to put in a plug for Mission Garden and invite you to go to our Native American event this Saturday from 9 to 2. And we are hoping that we are able to get a large group of people to come and visit the Tohono O'odham and other Native nations that will be there selling their wares. It's been a tough year for them also. Well, thank you for your time. I don't know who's left.
I've been talking.
Nancy?
Nancy, Neil, and Les, and
Joan and Pam.
Joan and Pam.
I think.
Thank you. Bill, you passed to Nancy, I think?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, Bill. And there's been a lot of terrific comments, and I'll add that I look forward to especially working closely with Lara and Tim in continued dialogue with the community around this, as well as future projects, and look forward to that. And I will pass it to Pam.
Mute.
Am I on?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, as like everyone said, I hope we continue to talk about this issue and pull in as many people as we can to preserve Reid Park. And and what I have this thing about the mailed survey, the flyers that were mailed. They only went a mile radius from the park, so they went a mile south. So they really needed to go further into Ward 5. So so yeah, it's been great. I don't know who hasn't gone yet.
Neil, you haven't gone, is that correct?
I have not. So I
Okay.
will go, and then I think Joan is the only one left.
No, Les, have you gone?
Not yet.
Okay, well, I'll go and then I'll pass to Les when I'm done. I'm just going to say that polarization is very easy from a distance, and it's also easy from the anonymity of a computer screen. But when you encourage people to come together and share their concerns, share their thoughts, share their recommendations, you're able to close that gap, and you're able to see and respect the position that the other people have on these things. And even if you don't reach a full consensus, a partial consensus can still be progress and can still be victory. And I think this process allowed us to get to that point where there was a success, not a full one, but even partial, allows us to take something of value to mayor and council that's very important to the community, to the zoo, and to the neighborhood in particular. So I think in the future, things like this can be of value especially when you're bringing together a lot of diverse elements and a lot of diverse voices to make some important decisions. So with that, I will pass to Les.
Thank you, Neil. Ditto everything you just said. I would also like to echo the comments Margaret had made. One question I was asked was, why are we having this discussion now and not 4 years ago? So I agree that whenever there's going to be a major project or issue that has the likelihood to cause concern among the impacted people, however that's defined, there needs to be some kind of process to hear those concerns. And also, if there's things that mayor and council can just do, they should just say this is not up for public discussion so that our expectations are not raised and then shattered like cheap crockery. As I had privately messaged to Tim, I hope that this process or something similar just becomes part of the standard procedure where it would be appropriate. And back to issues of communication that were touched upon, as a neighborhood leader, I would like to ask if mayor and council or PDSD could revisit giving more neighborhood associations more mailings a year so that we can keep our neighbors informed of what's going on. Because I think if people are made aware earlier, there's not going to be a sudden breaking of the dam of reaction to it, which would help with the communication issues brought up earlier. That's all I got, really. Thanks again for this process. It's been pretty fantastic. And again, big applause for all who put it together. Who's left?
I think that's Joan.
Joan, you get the talking stick.
Thank you, Les. So the question is, what are our hopes for future community interactions? My hope is that the optimism and trust that was built over the last month in the dedication is the starting point for the Reid Park Master Plan.
All right.
And thank you for this opportunity to be part of your group.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for this opportunity and for all you've done for the community and all you have said here today that has moved us forward. And with this, the core stakeholder group is now complete. We have finished and we are done. Our meeting is closed.